Mike, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit. I had a recommendation from one of our board members to have a little conversation with you about judging the Master Amateur Invitational down at Giddings, Texas. We've never actually talked to a judge after the fact, so I'm just curious. My first question for you is, was that your first Master Amateur Invitational you've been to?
Yes, it was. I had never attended one, never run one, didn't really, knew stuff on the periphery, but didn't know the ins and outs. And so my expectations were kind of, I don't know what they were, but I'll tell you what, it exceeded all of them. It was just a fantastic experience and just a neat event. I mean, just a great group of folks that worked so hard to make sure everything went without a hitch. And the grounds were amazing. My co-judge was super. The whole thing, it was just a great experience.
Oh, great. So I know you had a lot of experience with the Master National. Have you judged the Master National?
I have. In 14, I judged the Master National in California when it was, I believe it was 4 flights.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 4 flights.
Oh, wow.
Three flights, four. Yeah. With, so a huge difference in numbers even that long ago. But yeah, just the intimacy in doing it in 2 groups and being able to set up on your own.
Yeah.
Just lots of positives. And then the ability to not have to try and cookie cut stuff or cut corners of ponds to try and keep things flowing. And you never felt a time pressure or, a need to cut dogs to stay, you never felt like there was a mandated attrition rate. Not that there is in the Master National, is not what I'm saying. But judges in their own mind will say, hey, we got to finish this thing by Saturday. If we don't do something, we won't get there. It's just human nature. And I think especially the kind of people that should be judging these events are the kind of people that run their local club. They understand what dogs do and don't do. And they understand the whole time pressure thing. And so that was refreshing not to have any of that. I mean, we finished, I think, a day and a half or 2 days early.
Yeah.
And just didn't ever feel that pressure.
Right. Sure. So I'm curious, can you kind of compare the Master National to the Master Amateur? I mean, they're both basically about the same, right?
I think they're very similar, a lot more similar than I thought. The word on the street was that, the Master Amateur was going to be far easier. It wasn't going to be as hard because, you didn't have all the pros there and so on and so forth. Well, I found that to be contrary to what I experienced because we didn't have the time pressure.
Right.
We were allowed to let the dogs run at distance. We were allowed to let them swim at distance because the numbers were so much more manageable. And we didn't pencil a single dog.
Yeah.
Not one. At not one time did Richard and I sit at the end of the evening and say, hey, does this one add up? Either people picked them up or they knew. They just said, hey, thanks for letting me play as long as you did and really appreciate you being here. That was so much different than, there wasn't a single surprise. There wasn't one person that had a question about, hey, you dropped me after the 3rd series. Was it my blind? No, they knew. I mean, when they left the line, they said, hey, I'm sorry, for letting it get that far off or whatever. Sure. But yeah, no, it was different in that respect, I would say.
Well, great. So, these were all amateurs that are running this, not pros. So give us amateurs kind of a sense of what weaknesses did you see and where folks could be a little bit stronger when they're planning on running another one.
I mean, I don't think it differs really from, the same weaknesses that will show up on a weekend will show up at this thing. If you're not tight to the line on blinds, you won't be tight to the line on the blinds here, especially as it goes on. That was the other thing that was refreshing. And I was a little skeptical at first when we were told, hey, make that first series very simple and let them play. I said, okay, because in the Master National, a lot of times dogs will get sideways and lose them in that first series because it's difficult. And it's not, and believe me, it's not done by design. And I'm not saying anything negative toward the Master National. Anybody, please don't construe it that way.
Yeah.
But In the Master Amateur, it was like, no, we're just going to keep this thing very vanilla and let them play. People have traveled a long distance. They've, whatever. And I'll tell you what, you do lose some because somebody's going to break or somebody's going to
Yeah,
do something, you just can't carry them for.
sure.
But but the caveat was, but make each series more difficult as the event
Right.
went on, which we did. And we ran
Yeah.
all 6 series. And by the time we got to that sixth one was a man eater.
Yeah.
And anybody who went out on it, and we had a number of them who did, said, "Hey, thanks. That was fun. That was a thrill ride. And,
Yeah.
I'm sorry we didn't do it."
Yeah.
And then anybody who did pass and walked away from it, the sense of relief and joy was
Right.
neat. It was really cool. I
Yeah.
mean, it's different than
Sure.
most events of that size.
I've ran 3 of them now, and all 3 have been the same. They trying to get as many dogs through the first series, let them play, and then each series after that has been just a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So, and it's really, really interesting because I've ran several Master Nationals too, and I've never gone to one yet that had 6 series. They've all been 4 or
Right.
5, and that was it, and that was 10,
Right.
12 days later.
Right.
But Master Amateurs, they're usually done in 5 days, and they had 6 quality series.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just being able to keep the flights in smaller numbers keeps it that much more intimate. The other thing is that the dogs get a chance to run every day, sometimes twice. When you get toward the end, it's possible that one of the starting dogs could, finish the series and run still twice in the same day.
Yeah.
And not having, depending on how the numbers fell, you might be 2 days before you ran another series.
Right.
When the flights are larger.
Right. Yeah. You usually run every day, at least once every day.
Yep.
In my experience.
Yep.
So the committee and everybody that was behind the scenes, tell us your experience with all that.
It was great. All national events, I think, have that same sense of camaraderie, whether it be the Master National or the Master Amateur. Everybody kicks in and works and helps. And, it's a fun experience. They're long days. It's hard work. But yeah, the Master Amateur folks were super, and led by David Christensen. It would be hard to have a tense word if David weren't running the thing. So, I mean, and it's the same thing at the Master National. I mean, it's the same good quality folks, and a bunch of them, cross over, do both. So yeah, but it's a can do, get it done kind of, it's a fun camaraderie kind of thing. And I experienced that with both groups. I'm not trying to compare one with the other, but I think they're very similar in that respect.
Sure. So the Master Amateur Invitation is going to be up in your neck of the woods. It's going to be up by Carnation, Washington. So folks have never been there. I'm sure you've probably been up in that Carnation area once or twice.
Tell us
what we can expect.
It's a beautiful property. It's a dog training property that was owned by Bob Pepper. It was an old field trialer that a lot of people remember. They call it Snoqualmie Retrieving Grounds, I think now. But built for retriever training right on the river. In June, the weather, it will be absolutely peak grass conditions, water conditions. Everything will be ideal. No stinging plants, no stinging animals, nothing sharp in the ground that's going to, you're not going to run over cactus. There's going to be no bugs. There will be no humidity. The temperatures will be in the 70s probably. Yeah. I mean, it is going to be ideal. I mean, it will be as creature comfort friendly as you will find at a dog event in a really beautiful spot. And lots to see and do. You're not far from the city of Seattle.
Right.
Anybody who's not been to the Northwest, especially at that time of year, I would highly recommend them doing it. If you're in, if you have the least bit of inkling to do it, I would recommend doing it. I think it's going to be a really neat event.
Sure. Yeah. The last time I ran it was like 20 years ago. It rained so hard. I mean, I ran a junior. I drove all the way out there on a junior, and the poor ducks weren't floating in the water, and it was just a horrible experience. But I think that event was late April, early May, or something like that. It was probably during the rainy season.
Yeah, late April, early May is kind of when that season starts, and there's all kinds of horror stories about having a tow truck on site to get people out of it.
Yeah.
But by June, you won't have any of that. I mean, it would be very, very, very rare. But yeah, everything should be just tip-top shape. And they've got a greenskeeper who's a professional dog trainer who kind of lives on site and trims and mows, and that just the place has never looked better. It's just it's fantastic.
Great. So you would highly recommend folks try out the Master Amateur if they've never done it before?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just feeling awful that my young dog isn't going to be qualified and ready to run it, because it is just a neat event. It's just, I mean, it really is. And if you, like I say, if you have any thoughts about doing the thing, I mean, and you can pull it off, do it, because you will not have a better time. It's fun. I mean, it's an old school hunt test is really what it is. I've been doing this a long time, and I hearken back to, hey, this is the way it used to be, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So it's. And I only know one of your judges, Matt Griffiths, of the two that were named. And Matt is an old school dog guy who will put on great tests and be easy to be around and fun to be around. And yeah, I will make a point to go up during setup week just to help, so that I can hang around with my buddy Matt. But the judging panel looks like it's going to be great with Matt there. So I would definitely recommend that. Are you anticipating one flight, Mike, or what do you think?
Well, you know, they're planning on one flight, but if they have enough entries, they've got 2 other judges lined up and ready to go. And if it blows up beyond that, they'll get more. But right now they're planning on one flight. Most of the West Coast events, I think, have only been one flight. But I think this year it'll be 1, maybe 2, because the numbers of members that have joined out in the western half of the country have gone up quite a bit. So they're trying to get qualified for this Master Amateur.
Okay, great. Yeah, but no, I can't say enough nice about the thing. It was just really first class, really well done. And yeah, everything was just extremely well organized, and yeah, it was a first class event, no question.
So the one your flight A had a little hiccup during the Giddings event. That what was it? Your second series had to be scrapped, and then you had to move.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, second or third series. Maybe could have been the third. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was the second, because then I think you moved over to where your first was, close to where your first was. What happened there? Because I talked to the committee, and they said the dogs weren't having difficulty and stuff. But from your point of view, what did you see?
It was a land water test with very little water in it, and the water was all right at the line.
Yeah.
But if you remember, we had one of those big thunderstorms come in overnight and turned what was supposed to be the land portion of our test into a bog.
Oh.
And the birds were getting down in, pretty good coverage. You remember Texas, you can watch the grass grow at that time of year. The birds just kind of buried in the mud, in the water. Because when we ran setup dogs earlier in the week, it was a real doable test. It was a good test.
Right. Yeah.
But then once those birds started splashing down into it just became undoable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, there were dogs that were going to find it, but it was tough. I mean, it was way tougher than we had ever dreamt. But we didn't anticipate that being flooded either.
Sure. Yeah.
And again, with those small numbers in the flight, you were able to say, hey, this is not what we want. This is fixable. Let's fix it. And with the committee's support, we went ahead and fixed it. It was totally our decision. Nobody said, hey, this is too hard.
Yeah.
We looked at each other and said, hey, this is more than we want to do.
Right.
And didn't anticipate the flooding. I mean, that was just something you couldn't. Well, I think when the Master National was there, it was in the field that they called a river runs through it, because they had a similar situation where it flooded down in that lower area.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I wasn't there when they moved, and I'd never got the backstory on what actually happened there. It just I knew they decided to move. But with that property there, I mean, within an hour or two, you were moved over and started running dogs.
Yeah, we set up. What we did was you set up 2 land, 2 water, 2 water. We just moved to our other land water to replace that. And then later, after everybody else had gone home, Richard and I were able to find another spot to run our second land water. So it was quick. Everything was already set up and it was all set to go.
So walk me through the series, your first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and you said they were getting a little harder for each series. What was the most memorable one? Well, maybe the one that made you the most nervous about running dogs on, and the ones that you thought that they did better than you thought.
I don't know if there was any that they did better than we thought. We knew that the last series was going to be a handful because it required big swims. The marks were not long, but the pond, the way it's set up, allowed for large swims, which was going to burn memory time.
Yeah.
And it did. It was probably on average, probably close to an 11, 12-minute test.
Right.
So much longer than you get even in a weekend. So by the end of that, you really had to survive it. And we had a bunch of them that did that. So that part of it was neat. We knew it was going to be long, but it was. I thought it was, just went really smooth. But I don't remember anything that stuck out as having been extremely difficult that we didn't anticipate. Oh, here you go.
Yeah. So I thought this was the one thing I did notice that I wanted to make a point of. Every single series that had a flyer in it was out of order. Even on the other flight, it was the same thing. So both of those A and B flights had out of order flyers.
Yep.
Is that something that you all decided on?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to keep everything as consistently as we could. So if we did, if we had a leave it bird or we had, a flyer, we did try and do them in the same order so that we didn't have somebody that was running a go bird as the flyer and somebody else running as, an out of order flyer. So I guess that was done by design.
Okay. Well, that's fine.
Maybe not necessarily by design. We would design the test and then we would talk in the evening because the other group, as you know, was several miles down the road.
Yeah.
So we didn't really see their setups. I think we spent one afternoon over there after we were done, went over and kind of looked at their stuff. But yeah.
So when I saw this, I didn't run this flight. I was in the other flight. So when I came up and filmed the test dog run this, I was amazed at this test. This was one of those tests that, like, wow, I would love to run this. I think one of the hardest marks on this whole thing was the flyer because it lands way out in the middle of nowhere and there was nothing really to mark off of.
Right. And that flyer, and I don't see a yardage on there, but it was a long flyer. I'm guessing it was close to 140, 150 yards.
So your mark one was cutting the corner of the pond, but I think most dogs actually ran around it, but that wasn't a big deal. But then mark number 3 was an in-thrown bird.
In-thrown bird that landed at the kind of at the shoreline.
Yes.
And so most of them settled down by the time they got there, because it's a long enough swim. It's hard to tell from this picture how far it is across there, but it's
right.
I bet it's 40, 50 yards across there. So the dogs had time to kind of orient themselves and settle down and pick that bird out of there. I don't remember anybody running real long. And there's good separation between those marks. So we were never, we didn't try and stack anything or make sure, or do inline kind of stuff that became difficult to judge, which is kind of a personal philosophy of mine that I don't want to set anything up that becomes difficult for me to judge. Mm-hmm. So if I start doing a bunch of inline stuff and I'm not quite sure which bird they were sent for or which bird they picked up,
sure,
how can I expect the handlers of the dogs to know that? So I always like to have good separation. I think you can do all kinds of difficulty without trying to do stuff stacked in on top of one, especially when you got a piece of property like that one. You just don't need to do it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great insight. So once you got the marks, which were, that's a decent master test right there. That's probably, again, a national worthy event. And then I loved this series. But when it came to the blinds, I looked at that and I went, wow, those were tight.
And they are tight, but what you can't see from the photo is that left-hand blind on the land blind.
Yeah.
there's a pretty good side hill there that the dogs
Yeah.
wanted to come down. They did not want to go up that high on the hill. But again, it's far enough, and we ran it from two different spots so that it
Right.
became clear with the idea. And you know, Richard and I were simpatico on most everything, and he and I both looked at it and said, let's just make sure that when the handlers look out there and the dogs look out there, they see a clean picture.
Mm-hmm.
And because they are close together, so if you, by the time you stepped over that 12 or 15 feet to where the landline was, it was clear you didn't want them in the water.
Yeah.
They'd already been in the water enough. And so that's why we did it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that water blind just kind of caught the corner, and nobody really had trouble with that one. Where they would have trouble was along the side hill on that landline, because it did
Yeah.
want to force them down.
And I noticed that you'd lose sight of them if they went on top of that hill and went left. I mean, they were gone.
Yeah, it's kind of a berm up there once you
Yeah.
got to the top of it. So you had to be tight with a whistle once you got them to the top of the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
if you were loose at the top of the hill, you could slide over the back of it.
Yeah, that was a fantastic series. That was one of the, well, I would love to run that.
Yeah, we you know, that property was just spectacular. I mean, the Fullers just, I mean, you know, it is a dog training fantasy land. It's just, I mean, it was so cool. And the Fullers, you know, just had everything just, you know, dialed to the just perfectly.
And after talking to them, and they said that was just full of mesquite, and they had to go in and clear it all out, and you know,
yeah,
it took years and years and years to build it where it's at now. It's like,
yep.
wow, that's a lot of money going into some fantastic dog property. So we were very fortunate, I think, to have that. But let's talk about see if I can find it here. Your fifth series. I thought this one was kind of a neat test as well. And the one thing I did notice that even the A and B flights had diversion birds in their fifth series.
Yes.
So this was a little donut pond, I guess, just a little pocket pond, but it had rolling terrain in here.
Absolutely. And you know, again, photos won't do it justice as to how much that terrain rolls, and the middle bird in particular.
Yeah.
Because it's a pretty good it's a built up dam that kept that water in there. And so if the dogs got off the back side of that, we saw several of them that wanted just to continue to run and had to be whistled back down in there because the bird fell kind of on the back side of that dam. So they really had to mark it, and then they had to be willing to stay and trust themselves to stay in there and get it where they knew where it was, because this cover in front of us looks pretty sparse. The cover on the back of that dam was not sparse. It was pretty thick.
Yeah.
And then the diversion bird, I think, actually may have been moved further to the right when we actually ran it. And it really didn't give the dogs any trouble. We may have only had one or two dogs that showed any inkling on wanting to pick it up. You know, it did burn time for sure.
Yes.
And then that long bird, the first bird, it's a pretty good run down there to get to the water. By that time, they've picked up three birds. So the dogs were thinking anything they could do to not get wet would be okay with them.
Yeah.
And the line of it was clearly through the water. It was not a corner cut. It was a good fat piece of water, and set up that way by design. Mm-hmm. But if you cheated it, you ended up way left of it. And for one of the first times in memory, the wind actually blew the same direction that it did when we set it up.
Oh, yeah.
Which was left to right. So if you got past it, you weren't getting any wind help. You better have marked it, or you were going to be forced to handle it. And we had a number of them had to handle it.
That's a great conversion set of marks right there between 1 and 2. But I noticed when I was filming this, and it's typical when you have this kind of a flat property with a bunch of trees, that when that bird is launched, you really didn't see it until it skyline, and then it kind of disappeared behind the tree or with the tree. And it was hard to tell if it landed behind the tree that near it landed or in front of. So that was a really, I thought, an excellent set of marks.
Yeah, and as you can see, I mean, we have a ton of trees out there in that field, and so it was virtually impossible to get one that, like you say, didn't disappear into the tree. So we tried our best to give them something they could see. I think that line's pretty good. You could see it in the skyline on that one.
Yeah, right. You saw it for just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had good wingers, and they made good long throws. So they did hang in the air a while. I mean, if that thing were hand thrown, you'd have never seen it.
No, exactly.
So I thought that was a positive. So yeah, it gave everybody a real good, clean look at it. But yeah, that was a great series.
Yeah, I did too. And I thought your fourth series, if I can pull it up here, give me a second. When I first saw that fourth series, find it here.
You're testing my memory here. I didn't do any homework. I haven't looked at any of this stuff since we left Texas, I don't think.
All right, let's see. Share screen. Okay. So when I saw this one and you guys were setting it up, I thought, oh, this doesn't look bad at all. But when I came up and filmed it, I thought, holy cow, the dogs were having a trouble with this one.
And again, the pictures don't do justice to what that was. That bird that's off there on the right, the flyer, the second, bird number 2, the flyer, that thing is downhill all the way.
Yeah.
And as a dog got momentum, it really could get lost down in there.
Yeah, I saw a lot of them kind of pull off to the right and would end up back in here somewhere, and then they come back around.
We had a few backside that thing, which we didn't anticipate anybody backside because it is like it's a straight shot downhill, kind of thrown between the trees.
Sure.
Yeah, and then the third bird, which we landed directly in front of those trees, was a good bird too. The bird I thought was a real good bird in that series.
Yeah, and that was a bit of an illusion too, because I saw a lot of dogs blow right past it.
Well, it's probably 15 yards in front of where those trees are.
Yeah.
But from a dog's perspective, I think they thought it was thrown right at the base of those trees, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, there was plenty of good open space, which we wanted to do because we wanted to give them space to get, go left or right or make a decision as to which way they wanted. And again, that photo, bird 1 is actually quite a ways back. You don't run past it to get to that middle bird. It's deeper that way. It's thrown angled back. So there was no risk in, somebody having to run past the bird to get to one. Richard and I would have not agreed to do anything like that. We just didn't feel like that. Something you needed to do to run past the bird.
And then the dogs that I saw, I thought, boy, this blind's going to be a challenge too. But they actually did a really good job on that land blind. Yeah,
the land blind was kind of down the hallway, and everybody kind of settled down, even though it was under the arc of that. It became pretty clear to them that was, it's, again, I'll say it again, the pictures just don't do this piece of property justice because they're, like you say, it really rolled. It had some great contour to it.
Yeah, and that's why I try and film it too, so you get a better perspective of where the birds are and how the dogs did, instead of just doing pictures. I think the videos do it more justice than the pictures do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Mike. I'm glad to pick your brain here a little bit. Thank you for judging, by the way. I really appreciate it. I loved, even though I didn't run your flight, I loved spending time down there talking to you guys, and it looks like it was a lot of fun.
Oh,
around y'all.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. I mean, Richard and I got along just super well and have become friends. And it was, I didn't know Richard before. He didn't know me. And, we had friends in common, but we had never met before. And I'll tell you, that was a positive experience. And it was neat. And like I say, again, sound like a broken record, but if you have a chance and can get qualified and do get qualified and have a way to get to the Carnation, I would strongly recommend it. I think it was really a neat event.
All right. That's all I had. Do you have anything else to share? Or?
No, I can't imagine what that might be. It feels like, I don't know how we've been talking for 2 hours. Or 20 minutes, no, it was just a lot of fun. And thank you, Mike, for all you do. I mean, your photography and videography, and then the interviews you're able to do with the judges and the handlers during the event, I thought was just first class. And
Well, if you can't be there, I'm trying to make sure that you feel like you are there. So hopefully a lot of people got some enjoyment out of that.
And that's neat because I mean everybody's got a buddy who's gone and like, hey, I wonder what they're up to, and then you brought it to life for them because
Right.
you can hear somebody on the phone say, well, that first bird was thrown, but until you see it and you see a dog running it, it's just not the same.
I'm trying very hard, but I got to get permission from the American Kennel Club. But I'm hoping, and it'd be a lot easier if it's a single flight, and it'll make my job a lot easier. But I'm hoping to live stream it. We're trying to work on those details on the back end, but hopefully we can get that to work, and that would be kind of a cool thing.
Oh, that would be really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be neat for sure.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Well, thank you.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
All right. Again, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Mike.
All right. Take care.
Okay. You too.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye.